Alright, so today I'm going to show you how to solder a couple of different things. So the first thing is this ribbon cable. I'm going to be soldering it onto this potentiometer, two of them actually. So first thing I want to do is strip these wires. So I need to, because it's a ribbon cable, I need to split them apart. Which is easier said than done sometimes. Okay. And I actually want to split them apart a little bit more than I would think, because I need to be able to fit heat shrink tubing onto them after I'm done soldering. Let me find the right size heat shrink tubing. That might be a bit small. This might be a bit too small. Like barely would fit over the... Okay, this is the right size because this is the one I have the least of. That's always how that works. I need to figure out what diameter that is and just order a bunch of that. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go and strip these wires. Now, I recommend getting some wire strippers that are good. Like these are kind of some cheaper Chinese ones, but they're actually really good. They're very sharp, and they're not. Now I forget what size wire this is. Let's try 0.5, and they're not dull. Yeah, that worked. Okay, so I'm using the 0.5 millimeter, so half millimeter, and I'm just stripping off, I don't know, probably like a centimeter, something like that. Maybe a quarter of an inch, depending on how you think of things. Okay. And whenever you're stripping wire that is like multi-stranded like this, you want to twist it together after you strip it. Just makes it easier to deal with. And I mean, sometimes it depends on how you're going to be soldering it. Maybe you want to have them all as separate strands, but usually I don't. I actually want to strip off a little bit more of this one. Okay, that will be good. And also you want to make sure that when you strip it that you don't cut it so, like, use the wrong setting on your wire strippers, because you might end up cutting some of the strands. Alright, so I've got my 3 wires there. Let me check my wiring diagram again for these potentiometers to make sure I wire them up right. Okay, so it looks like, yeah, I'm just going to do that, and I'm just trying to, because I'm putting these on a circuit board, and I want to make sure these are lined up the way, the same way as the rest of the connectors, like with these silvery bits facing the same direction. So these potentiometers are a little weird. Like they're meant so that you could mount them in a panel, or you can mount them on a circuit board. It's got these little tabs here to help secure it. But so I'm going to do a panel mount, which means that these pins they're just straight, and I don't, how would you solder these together? So what I like to do with these is take my pliers and actually like bend them a little bit to kind of make them into a little hook. And that way I can then make the wire into a hook, and then maybe it'll be easier if I go at straight on. Yeah, I can make the wire into a hook. Yeah, straight on's better. And then hook them together like you're pinky swearing, right? So like that. Alright, so let me make sure I line up these correctly. Kind of bend these over as well. Some people like to put a little bit of solder on both connections before you do all this, but I just prefer to hook it together and solder it like that. So today I'm going to be using helping hands here. So this is a tool that has like little alligator clips here, and it'll help you by holding parts in place while you do stuff with them. And now I'm going to be doing this a little bit backwards from how I would do it. Oh, actually, I almost forgot. Really, really important to remember. If you're going to put heat shrink tubing on things to protect the connections, you need to do it before you solder them. So that's obviously real important, because once you solder them, that's it. You can't you can't put the heat shrink tubing on anymore. You have to resort to electrical tape, which is messy. I've never been happy with an electrical tape protection on a soldered joint, because it always ends up peeling away over time, and I just don't like it. Alright. So I'm going to do this a little backwards, like I said, because I want to make sure that you can see it. I wonder if I can do it like this instead. I can actually use the little magnifying glass that's built into this helping hands. Okay. Alright, so I've got the blue one on, so I'm just going to solder it now, just to hold it in place. So, what you want to do with soldering is make a very fast heat transfer. So, I'm putting a little bit of fresh solder on my soldering iron, and then I'm going to touch both the wire and the thing that I'm contacting, and you might notice that the shielding started melting, and that just happens with wires. That's why I cut a long enough piece of heat shrink tubing, that it wouldn't be a problem. So now I'm just going to continue on, and since that worked out so well, let me rotate this just so I can see it better. There we go. So since that worked so well, I'm going to okay, that's better. Of course, when I go to fix it, okay, need to be careful. Not used to using a magnifying glass like this. All right, that's good enough. So now I can put a little fresh solder on there, and then solder it together. And then we just got one more to do. This will be easier because I can see the whole thing. Okay, wow, that was that was way easier. All right, and we're going to just use like the fat side of this soldering iron because I'm not convinced that I made a good connection. There we go. All right, so now I have 3 connections there. This one looks like it's a cold joint, so I'm going to heat it up a little bit more. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to slide these heat shrink tubes up into place, and this will do a couple things. It'll hide these ugly solder joints, and it will also protect them from shorting out on adjacent wires, and or on anything that's nearby. So I'm going to use a heat gun now, which I actually just have like a butane torch that I like to use for this. So this is kind of fun here. I like doing this part. And there we go. Now those connections are safe. Whew, that butane. I need to vent out the room. Yeah, so now those connections are protected, and we can move on to the other one. All right, so I want to solder this connector onto this board, and what I like to do is put the connector on there and then get some electrical tape, and we're just going to cut a small piece. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to hold this header in place while I solder. And you can see it just like jiggles around. It'll fall out if I tip it over, but I want to hold this in place, and not just in place but also straight. So I'm going to put this down straight and then carefully tape it such that it is vertical. So that looks pretty vertical. And then once we solder the first connection in, it won't be a big deal anymore. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, that's exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to go in here, and actually I'm going to tape down this whole board just to keep it from moving around while I solder. And that's just because I don't want to clamp this with the helping hands, because it yeah, this will work. I don't want to damage the board. All right, so that should, let's actually move this a little bit to center it better in the frame. All right, so now we've got this taped down. We can start soldering. So I'm not going to solder all these connections because I don't need all of them, and one of them is really close to this wire. So when you solder, it's important to work quickly, but also make sure you give enough time for the solder to or for the flux and solder and stuff like that to do its thing, to heat up and actually make a good solid connection. So it's important to transfer the heat very quickly to the parts, both parts at the same time that you're soldering together. And you do that, that's like a huge glob of solder. I don't need that much. And you can do that by using a little bit of solder on the soldering tip to make that connection, and then put a little bit more down, hold it for a second, and then let go. And now we've made that connection. And we can just continue going down the line. And sometimes if it doesn't make a good enough connection, just add a little bit more. Do that. And see, I started touching other stuff. Okay, see that one actually was a cold solder joint. I didn't let it sit long enough. Yeah, you can tell that it's a cold joint when it becomes a little cloudy. Yeah. So you just gotta let it hold it for a second so that the flux that's inside this solder has the time to clean all the connections. And heat up both sides of the connection so that it actually bonds with both. So yeah, you can see I accidentally plugged up a couple of holes here, but that's not a big deal. I'm going to end up soldering some wires to them. I know that was kind of an abrupt ending, but thank you for watching, and I hope you'll check out my other videos. Thanks.